Let's start the show. All right, so today, savings and wealth. So hopefully a lot of us should know what savings is, right? Savings is my current income minus my spending on current needs. The book only says needs, but let's be real, it's needs and wants, right? I buy a lot of crap I don't need that I just want. And so when we're talking about something that is a savings rate, we're just talking about how much is saved out of how much is earned. So your savings divided by your income. So again, if we're using our bathtub methodology or thinking about this kind of stuff, right? Then we've got some kind of hole there, the water's coming out, and this is the level of water, right? And the red is the drain, it's stopped up. And so savings is this flow. While wealth is the value of your assets minus the value of your liabilities. So we'll go over what each one of these things is in a second. Assets, this is just anything that one owns. So my shoes, right? It seems kind of silly at the time, but like right now we talk about shoes as an asset, but 20 years ago, I was on a cruise in like Caymans or Barbados or something like that, right? And there's all these, street vendors and people, on the side of the street selling, rocks and little things that they make, right? And I'll never forget it. This guy, my brother was interested in something, but obviously didn't have the money to pay for it or whatever. And the guy could tell that my brother was interested in it, and so the guy starts being like, "Well, your shoes, give me your shoes. I'll take your shoes and I'll give it to you." He really liked my brother's, new American shoes, and so he knew that okay, I could flip those shoes. Let me buy those shoes off of you, right? And my parents were like, "No, you can't. You're not going to sell your shoes, Michael." But it's really anything, right? So. Nowadays, a lot of our assets take the form of these digital things, right? They're blips on a screen, right? It's numbers on our bank account when we check our bank account, right? It might be numbers on our digital wallet if we check our cryptocurrency balance or whatever the case may be, right? So assets are anything you own. So it could be property, could be stock, could be like a crypto, could be cash, could be video games, could be magic cards, right? Could be all sorts of stuff. Liabilities. What is a liability? I am, said my mother. No, I'm kidding. Liability are the debts that one owes. So liabilities, for most of us is going to be like credit card debt. It may be, some student loan debt, or you might just have debt to the school, right? You might owe the school some money right now that you need to pay before the end of semester. People have debt from mortgages, right? So a lot of times you don't buy a house straight up, you finance the house with a mortgage, and so it's both an asset and a liability. You own the house. Well, the bank owns the house till you pay off the mortgage. You own some of the house. It gets a little complicated. So we tie all of this. Okay, so wealth is the water here. So wealth is the stock, while savings is the flow. We put all of this together on something called a balance sheet, which we'll do an example of here. A balance sheet, which is a list of assets and liabilities. And so balance sheet, the two important characteristics are that it's at some specific date. It's not telling us over a year, here's your balance sheet. It's saying as of October 6, 2021, here's how much Chris is in debt. $120,000. Economic unit is also required. We need to talk about Chris compared to talking about Chris's family or talking about the school that Chris works at, right? So economic unit could be a business, could be a household, etc. So let's go ahead and do an example of a balance sheet. Consuelo. So Consuelo's balance sheet. So all balance sheets are divided down the middle. We've got assets on the left half. We've got liabilities on the right half. So assets, we know that just the cash that you have in your pocket is an asset. The money, the on-demand deposits that you have, the checking account deposits, those are also assets. Any shares of stock you may own, whatever their market value is, that's the asset value. Car, again, that's going to be the market value, is an asset. If you have a used car sitting in your driveway, now's the time to sell it, right? The used car prices have gone up 40% in the last year. I don't know why I'm waggling my finger so much. Furniture, again, market value. It's $500. So my total assets, I'm just going to sum all this up together. I get $6,280. Now, what about my liabilities? So under liabilities, the book keeps it pretty simple. We've got student loans of $3,000, and we've got credit card balance of $250. So our total liabilities is going to be $3,250. So, what's our net worth? It's going to be equal to our assets minus our liabilities. And so it's going to be $6,280 minus $3,250, which gives us a net worth of positive $3,030. Why did I stress positive? Because it's not always going to be positive, right? A lot of times net worth is negative. The average U.S. household has like $8,000 of credit card debt or something like that, right? And I think it's like 50% of them are unable, or they don't know where they would get $500 if they had like an unexpected car or medical expense. So most of America is living paycheck to paycheck on the brink of not having money to spend. You know, they can't get sick, they can't have large expenses come up because they just don't have the savings, and we're all loaded up with debt. All right, so let's talk about some of the stuff I've been talking about. Let's define it. So flow values and stock values. So a flow is defined per unit of time, right? So I made so much money in the last month. I saved this much money over the last couple years. I spent this much money at Walmart in those 2 weeks when my daughter was here. And my wage for a given hour right? So this is all per unit of time. So these are all flows. These are all things that are happening at some rate. Compare this to a stock. A stock is defined at a point in time. So wealth, debt, right? We can always go take a terrifying look at the U.S. debt clock. Did we do that in this class already? We already did. All right, we'll skip it this time. But the debt clock tells us both the flow, the deficit. Well, let's just find it. U.S. I think it's just usdebtclock.org. Clerk. So the debt is the stock. That's the thing that's increasing. The deficit is the thing that is the flow. So every year, this national debt, which is at $28 trillion, $28.8 trillion, every year it's going up by $3 trillion. And so this is breaking it down by the second, right? It's a real-time running total. But for the most part, this debt is a snapshot, and this deficit is over a certain amount of time, over the last 20 or 12 months. Interesting to take a look at some of our debt to GDP ratios, right? So it's not that we've never had a lot of debt compared to our GDP. It's just that now our debt to GDP, we've got more debt than our yearly GDP. And we actually don't know if that's a problem. So interestingly enough, we don't know if this is a problem. For a while, we thought it was a problem because there was this really influential study called the Reinhardt and Rogoff study. But turns out they kind of selectively didn't include some things, and they made some errors, and some grad students actually redid their analysis and found that, what's going on here? Some grad students redid their analysis and found that it didn't actually hold true. Now, this was really unfortunate because since it was a very influential paper, policymakers internationally around the globe took what they wrote and ran with it. And so they wrote something that said to the nature of above 120% of a debt to GDP level is bad for the economy in the short run, and above 150% is like really bad. And so what ended up happening is that these countries that were running pretty high debt levels ended up getting punished by either the International Monetary Fund, which is kind of like the international cops of banks, if that makes any sense, or in the Eurozone they were punished by the European Central Bank and stuff like that. So long story short, there were some really misguided policies that ended up having some real negative economic and real world consequences that were the result of these people. Part of it was carelessness. Part of it was them just selectively not including all of the countries that they should have, right? Which is a big methodological no-no. So all of that to just say we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with debt as it relates to GDP, with our deficit or our debt, how bad it is, if it's bad at all. What we do know is that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, there'll be a catastrophic default on the U.S. Treasury market that will send ripples throughout the rest of our financial and real economic sphere that's going to cause another recession or maybe depression. So they'll get their heads out of their you-know-wheres soon enough and pass something. So we know that the flow of savings causes the stock of wealth to change. So said another way, every dollar a person saves adds to their, I'll use gendered pronouns here, wealth. Penny saved is a penny earned, right? A high savings rate today leads to improved standards of living in the future. Why is this? Why would a high savings rate today improve our standard of living in the future? But what did we learn? What was one of the big determinants of wealth and growth and, or just standard of livings, right? Just growth and standard of livings. The biggest one we know was technology, right? But also just capital stock in and of itself, right? And so high savings rate is going to result in both higher levels of capital and also going to probably result in some innovation and some technological improvements, right? So high savings rate today, we're sacrificing consumption today so that we can hopefully consume more in the future. That's what we're all doing when we save for retirement as well. Now we may have some changes to our wealth when the value of our assets change. So let's talk about how we discuss those kind of things. We're going to use these terms capital gains and losses. So your wealth changes when the value of your assets changes. When it's positive, we're going to call that a capital gains tax, or sorry, capital gains. We're positive, we're going to call it a capital gains. Capital gains is an increase in the value of existing assets. So these are assets that you currently own. Compared to if the opposite happens, if all of a sudden, so let's say you owned a lot of Facebook stock, right? You're probably experiencing some capital losses because the value of Facebook stocks plummeted after that whistleblower testimony and stuff, right? So capital losses decrease the value of existing assets. So for capital gains, right, this one's pretty easy. We could just think of a higher stock price. For capital losses, we can think about a car accident that damages your bumper and front headlight. That's capital loss, dog. It's no bueno. So anytime we have a change in our wealth, it's going to be the result of savings from that period plus any capital gains minus any capital losses. We'll talk a little bit about U.S. household wealth from the 1990s to the 2000s. So we saw a increase in stock ownership in the 1990s. So this is directly the result of direct purchases and it's also the result of mutual funds. So you could, instead of buying a specific stock, now you could buy a stock that is a broad, diverse, so it's an investment vehicle that comprises many, many, many different other stocks or investments. We've got pension and retirement funds. As more of the baby boomers are getting older and older, right? And as a result of this increase in stock ownership, we found that stock prices rose rapidly. Supply and demand, right? And when these stock prices rose rapidly, they were accompanied, that's got an I in it, not a Y, by increases in household wealth because of capital gains on stocks. Now, the result of this increase in wealth might have depressed household savings rates. You were getting wealthier without having to do anything. So why would you go ahead and, save as much or start to save more than you used to save? And then what happened? We had a big stock market decline, the dot-com bust, but our household savings did not bounce back. So the household savings rate remained low. And also during this period, we had the value of privately owned homes increasing rapidly. Rapido. And so the value of these homes essentially meant that what? If your value of your home increased rapidly, then that meant what? You were wealthier. Again, through capital gains. So more downward pressure on that savings rate. Now, why are households saving in the first place? So the first reason is what we call life cycle savings. And life cycle savings is to meet long-term objectives. So this is going to be retirement. Might be purchasing a home. Depending on the environment, you may need a larger or smaller down payment, right? You may want to save for your children's college attendance, so they don't have to scrape like you do or have to get loans. We may want to save for precautionary reasons. So this is for protection against setbacks. What do we mean by setbacks? So if you have a loss of a job, if you have a medical emergency, I think the recommended, and this is definitely a PJ question, personal finance, right? The finance guy, PJ Kim rather than me, but it's something like 3 months of your salary, right? You're supposed to have in savings just in case stuff goes down, but I can't recall a time I ever had 3 months of stuff in my savings. Most of the people I know also don't, unless they made it big on crypto or something else. Bequest savings. So bequest savings is to leave an inheritance. So this is nice if you get to do this, right? This is mainly for higher income groups. So, as often the case, we can compare our performance with ourselves over time, and we can also compare our performance with other countries of similar sizes. So, if we talk about China, right, we're often talking about China. Chinese households save save a quarter of their disposable income. This is a very high rate. And it wasn't always this way. Until the late 1980s, it was only 10%. So why has there been such a spike in the savings rate? Well, these life cycle and precautionary motives are really what's driving it. So wealth has only recently come to China. There's a lot of younger people that are richer than older people. And the savings of the young, not the younged, the young, outweighs greater than the dis-savings of the old, the elderly. And lastly, there's a limited social safety net. You know, we have unemployment benefits here. We have supplemental nutrition assistance program for families, right? You know, there's job retraining and things like that. There's Social Security, right? If you don't save anything for retirement, you're at least going to be able to pull, you know, $1,000 plus out of Social Security every month until you die after you're 65 or 67 or 69 or whatever it ends up being. A lot of this stuff doesn't exist in a lot of other countries. So they save more as a way to cover their ass, right? Additionally, there's little opportunity for individuals to borrow. And as a result of this, savings are necessary for any large purchases. And there's actually been a whole recent movement in China about, how do they start a system of credit where they're actually, issuing credit cards and things like that, right? Because nobody has a credit record in China. And so they started doing their own kind of system, very centralized, right? Very, federal government runs it. And there's been some arguments about it being overly harsh, right? So there was this example, I can't remember the exact podcast, but there's an example about this guy that he made a bad business decision. He purchased a bunch of something that he thought he was going to be able to resell, and he wasn't able to resell it, right? And because of that, he owed this other person, I don't know, let's say $250,000, right? Well, like I talked about before, there's no bankruptcy in other places, right? Bankruptcy is a very American concept. And so without any way to wipe the slate clean, that followed this gentleman around for a while, this debt. And it got to the point where the system that China has, the credit rating system that they have, it's not just about your access to financial things. It's about your access to other kind of perks. So this guy, because he was put on this list of undesirable people that don't pay their debts, he could no longer travel by air. He had to take trains everywhere in China. Now it's not as huge of a deal in here, right? As the United States, because not being able to fly anywhere here would be so onerous. But because there's high-speed trains all over China, right? So it wasn't that terrible in terms of a change. The really terrible thing, I think, was that they put a message at the beginning of when you call him. That's a message in Mandarin or whatever. That's the person you are about to call is an undesirable person that has not paid their bills. So in order to even call this person, the government issued this warning message. So their methods for doing it are different. That's for sure. And we can argue the relative merits and costs of that later. But it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see how they're trying to cobble together a credit system from the data and the actions that they do have, right? All right, so how does this all tie together with financial markets? So savings and the real interest rate. So savings often takes the form of a financial asset that pays a return. So this could be, a bond. You might get a municipal bond from the city of Ch9. People bought bonds for the math and science building. They bought bonds, so they invested in that, and over time, Ch9 will pay them back for that investment. This could be something called a certificate of deposit. A lot of us don't really know what these are because they pay crap. Ever since we've been alive, they've paid nothing, right? But, in the 80s and stuff, you could actually, you could go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to give you this money. It's a certificate of deposit. You're going to give me a certificate that says that I deposited this money. We're going to have this agreement. I'm not going to take this money out again for 18 months. And then you're going to give me 5% on the money that I invested. So it's a relatively risk-free investment on your end because it's your bank. Your bank's the one that's paying you back. And then, of course, we have stonks. And now we have crypto, digital currencies, digital assets, NFTs. So when we talk about how much do these things actually return, we're not going to talk about the nominal interest rate. We're going to talk about the real interest rate. So the real interest rate, abbreviated by R, is the nominal interest rate. So when they tell you, yeah, we'll pay you 5% a year on it, that's the nominal interest rate. And the real interest rate is the nominal interest rate minus the rate of inflation, which is abbreviated by pi. Which, if any of you have had any other econ classes, you'll be like, well, I thought pi was profits. It is. It's both of them. There's so many Greek letters, and they reuse them. I don't know why. So yes, pi is also profits in addition to being inflation. And so the real interest rate, this is the thing that tells us how much did my asset actually increase or decrease in terms of purchasing power. And the marginal benefit therefore represents, the real interest rate therefore represents the marginal benefit of the extra savings. So let's take a look at some snapshots of what's going on. Savings in perspective. So those mutual funds, those things that I was telling you about that, are a broad assortment of stocks and bonds and things like that, they've had an 8% return since their inception in 1926. So pretty good bet in terms of the long-term return. We've got 100 years of data supporting it, right? Compared to some other, relatively new assets that have only been around, you talk about crypto and stuff, it's only been around for 12, 15 years, right? And the return of it has not been consistently positive, right? A lot of times it'll be negative because the price of it is so volatile. So many households in the U.S. have $5,000 in credit card debt at high interest rates, like 29% or something like that. And so the bottom line is that, savings pays off in the long run rather than getting in debt. So don't get into debt, period. But why do households get into debt? Why does this end up happening? If our goal is, at the end of the day, to maximize our lifetime well-being, then why don't we just simply do that? So this has been a topic of study of both economists and psychologists for the last 20, 30 years. And psychologists, those who study the brain and behavior, suggest that individual self-control may in fact be too weak to produce rational outcomes. Examples of this would be smoking, obesity, gambling, and overspending. So as a result, there have been a lot of devices to support savings. So we want to make savings automatic and make withdrawals costly. And that's exactly what happens with individual retirement accounts. There's penalties for early withdrawal of those individual retirement account funds. Unfortunately, right now we're in an era of easy borrowing. What the? Something new. So credit cards, home equity loans, reverse mortgage on your house, right? All this stuff is easily and excessively pushed on us so that we will continue to demand stuff. Let's try to explain some of the reasons that we've got a depressed household rate of savings in the United States. So U.S. household savings may be depressed by Social Security, Medicare, and other government programs for the elderly. If those didn't exist, we would save more, right? Because we would realize that our medical coverage and the basic bare bones existence that we would be guaranteed by Social Security would no longer be there. Mortgages that have a small or no down payment. You used to have a sizable down payment, and now you can get mortgages with small to no down payments. As Americans, and I have fallen victim to this so many times in my life. We're just so confident, right? We're just confident in a prosperous future. Of course I'm going to make more money next year. Of course I'm going to make more money when I graduate, when this happens. You know, the sun will come out tomorrow. And increasing value of stocks. Or growing home values. Last two that we have, and then we'll call it a day. I'll take attendance, then we'll call it a day. Don't. Take attendance first. Is we have the readily available home equity loans. In fact, it's part of the American dream. It's part of the fabric of the, right? So much so that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, there are these two giant government institutions that exist to underwrite home equity loans at cheaper rates. So the government, and part of that has to do with the fact that when that was introduced, they had this theory that debt incumbent workers won't go on strike. And so they wanted to get as many people to be in debt for a home. Debt incumbent homeowners are not going to go on strike because it would kind of solve the labor problem. And lastly, right, we've just got keeping up with the Joneses, demonstration effects. But I got to get the latest clothes because that's what all the other, I got to get a new backpack this year because everybody gets a new backpack this year. But your backpack from last year is totally fine, right? So status goods and demonstration effects, unfortunately, also, keep us all keeping up with the Joneses, consuming more than we probably should, and depressing the savings rate. All right, I'll go ahead and I'll take attendance real quick. Last class. Have a great semester. Good luck on your final. It was really nice teaching you all. Send me emails with anything if you have any questions.